Hello everyone, thank you for attending our session. Very happy to be here along with my team. Huge thanks to Tessian for inviting us here today. Today's topic is on hacking humans with AI as a service. This sharing is a summarized version of what was presented in DevCon earlier this year. Let me introduce to you our team. We are part of a research team of 4 from Singapore. We work at the Government Technology Agency's Cybersecurity Group, or GovTech CSG for short. This research is led by Eugene, also known as Space RaccoonSec in the cybersecurity community. Hock and myself are part of the red team in GovTech, and we lead the phishing exercises for this research. And finally, we have Timothy, who lead the technical defense research against AI-generated text. Here's what we will cover today. We will start with the challenges faced when conducting social engineering exercises, in particular, phishing. Next, we'll have a quick look at the recent advances in AI and how the challenges faced in phishing could be addressed with AI as a service. Finally, we'll examine the viability of human hacking using AI as a service. First up, social engineering and its challenges. Even though phishing often yield good results, be it for red team engineers or simulation exercises, it often takes significant time to research or OSINT on the target and the effort to analyze the results. This effort increases with each new target, and the challenges can be broadly categorized as behavioral analysis and text generation. Interestingly, these are also strengths of AI. Capability of AI have improved over the past few years, and we now have a better understanding of what AI can do or cannot do. For a start, here are some tools that can be used by recruiters to automatically analyze public information such as LinkedIn profiles, blog posts. Coming from an attacker's perspective, we could repurpose it to perform personality analysis. Although the results could only provide a general direction, it is a good foundation for the red team engineers to work on. After collecting the target's information, it is time for text generation. June last year, OpenAI released a text-in, text-out interface for assessing the state-of-the-art language model, GPT-3. Having an API for the GPT-3 model provides a major leap in accessibility. It used to take a really long compute time and millions of dollars to train the model individually, but users could now access it via the API for just a few cents per 1,000 tokens. As a simple example, we instruct the model to create an email that encourages the target to open an attached document. And here is the output from OpenAPI GPT-3. Note that the output follows a typical email format and is nicely written within seconds. We have seen bits and pieces of how AI as a service may help in phishing campaigns for red team operations. Let's now put it all together to see how it works. I'll let Hock elaborate on this and deliver the rest of our presentation. Over to you, Hock.
All right, thanks, Glenice. Hello, everyone. I'm Hock here, and I'll share more about how we can use these AI as a service products into our phishing pipeline, and we'll showcase the results as well. Firstly, this is a very simple diagram that breaks down the key phases of a phishing engagement. Typically, we start off with doing OSINT investigation on the target itself, like LinkedIn profile, Twitter profile, any other social media links, from which we can actually apply Humanetics AI, whereby we send over the social media links, and then we'll do a personality analysis on the target. Then the service will return a JSON set of results, which will actually pass it into specific sets of instructions to OpenAI. So these plaintext instructions will be sent over to OpenAI, from which it will actually generate the phishing content. So at this point in time, the phishing content is more or less ready to be sent out. However, depending on the team's comfort level, you can actually modify the content or just use it entirely. The subsequent steps are actually very similar to any other phishing engagement. So with that, we will actually look at the results itself of this revised phishing pipeline. We actually use this phishing pipeline over 200 targets across a period of 3 months, whereby we are engaged in multiple authorized phishing exercises. Firstly, the experiment is broken down into 2 types. For type 1 experiment, we are looking at investigating the effectiveness of convincing the targets to click on phishing link in the phishing email. For type 1 experiment, the target group received 2 emails, one from AI and the other from the red team operator. Then for type 2 experiment, we are looking to investigate the effectiveness of convincing targets to open malicious documents in phishing email. So for type 2 experiment, the target group is divided into 2 groups. One will receive AI-generated content, while the other group will receive a content generated by red team operator. So we look at the design, the setup of type 1 experiment. Firstly, we start off with mass phishing campaign, from which we identify targets for spearfishing campaign itself. For mass phishing campaign and spearfishing campaign, we actually look at a few key metrics. For example, the number of targets who click on the phishing link. Then subsequently, we look at the activity that they did on the phishing site itself, whether they actually interacted with the form itself. The table you see here is simply the sample size for each of the exercise run. We conducted 3 exercise runs for type 1 experiment. So these are the results for stage 1, basically the mass phishing campaign. How we can analyze this chart is that first we look at column A, which represents exercise A. We look at the bar chart first. What it's trying to say is that 20% of the target actually click on the phishing link, from which we look at the pie chart at the bottom, whereby it says that 80% of that 20% actually interacted with the form on the phishing site itself. So from this experiment, we observe that exercise A and exercise C, we see more victims falling prey to AI-generated content. For exercise B, it does show slightly different result. However, the result might be, or rather the difference might be negligible because the sample size in terms of raw numbers was that simply one more victim clicked on the human-generated content. However, because the sample size is around 100 targets or more, this can be negligible. Next, we proceed with stage 2, whereby we conduct spearfishing campaign from the targets identified from stage 1. From this, we actually observed that exercise A and B, it was evident to us that AI was more convincing to get the target to click on the link. However, for exercise C, we are unable to complete the experiment because our phishing site that we developed was flagged by major browsers as a deceptive site. Next, we look at type 2 experiment setup and the results. So for this, as mentioned, the target group is divided into 2 distinct groups, and they receive content from AI and the content from human operators separately. With that, it was clear to us that AI was actually more convincing in getting the targets to click on the link itself. Finally, these are the key observations from our experiment. We have 3 key takeaways here. Firstly, we observed that AI-based, or rather using AI as a service products into our phishing pipeline was more effective in terms of reducing the time required for phishing content curation and context analysis. Secondly, we observed that AI-generated content was in general more convincing. However, we still need more data to support such claim because there might be other variables at work. And lastly, we also observed a varying degree of governance when it comes to access to AI as a service products. For example, when it comes to OpenAI, there was a very stringent validation process whereby we have to state our use case when we register for the account. However, for some other AI as a service products, you can actually just use an email and you can access their services immediately. With that, I come to the end of our sharing. Thank you very much for staying on with us for this session, and we'll proceed with the Q&A.
Thank you for taking us through that research. I'm now here joined with Timothy and Eugene to talk us through what this means for the future of phishing and how enterprises can defend themselves. So maybe Timothy, starting with you, what are the technical defenses available today that are able to detect phishing content generated by AI? And maybe touch a bit on the limitations of these defenses.
Thank you, Ed. So I guess when we talk about the technical defense, first we need to try to frame the problem itself. So there's to detect phishing content generated by AI, right? That itself we can look into 2 parts. So the detection of phishing content and content generated by AI. For the phishing content detection, I guess there has been a lot of academic work on it, be it content-based or non-content based, right? Where they look into the domain health, there are multiple different aspects like message ID and so on and so forth. And content-based would be like what are the tags, urgency, so there are all these are stuff that will be taught to you for phishing campaign, right? And then we look into the part that we are trying to work towards that has not much defense yet, which is the detection of AI generation. So when we going through this approach of detecting artificially generated text, the team, we have three, initially during the brainstorming stage, we have three different ways. So we will be using AI against AI, right? So I guess that's the way to go. So the three ways are like, first, we have simple classifiers. So where we define certain rules based on tag or machine learning based NLP classifiers. Next, we were looking at fine-tune based detection, where we train a model based on different kind of languages that are available in the market, such as like GPT-3, GPT-2, Google's BERT, and so on and so forth. Lastly, which is the model that we decide to settle on, will be a method called zero-shot detection, right? So using this method, we have a model that learns a classifier based on one set of labels, and then it evaluates on a totally different set of labels that the classifier or the model had never seen before. So we specifically choose this way because of the flexibility, and then because we can just train one and we can use it to predict other set of language model. But of course, like you asked, right, if there are any limitations. So definitely, I guess solving synthetic text detection itself is still a hard problem. And limitations will be that because you are training a model based on a certain data set, right? So definitely it will be more sensitive towards the data set that you are trained compared to a data set that the model has never seen before.
Great, thank you for that. Yeah, it's interesting that you brought up AI versus AI. It feels like we've been saying that for maybe 5 years now, but maybe it is really here, which is kind of a scary thought. Eugene, on that, is there any evidence that AI is being used by malicious actors, like out in the wild, or is this purely still kind of academic research at the moment?
So I think there have been some, very high-profile cases, one or two reported in the media where adversaries have used, for example, AI voice generation to spoof or pretend to be another actor, and I think these cases are going to keep coming up. But what we're concerned about is on the mass scale of things. And when you think about mass phishing, we tend to have very cheap pipelines. There's a little bit of automation, but not that much technical advancement. And what we're concerned about is that as AI as a service makes these capabilities cheaper and more accessible to a large number of users, we might start seeing a kind of AI at scale being used in phishing. So that's something we're concerned about.
Great. I guess it's kind of inevitable that as the cost comes down, we could expect it to be used more and more. So maybe we should be watching out for that. And I guess lots of teams are already. I guess one of the challenges, right, is you get an attack, and unless you have the classifier that Timothy was mentioning, you don't know whether it was written by AI or whether AI was even involved in the construction of that. To the end user, it looks like a sophisticated spearfishing attack. It's kind of like a multi-dimensional problem where you need to detect the attack, but also you've got and was this generated by AI, and therefore do I need to change my defenses based on this kind of, I guess, new threat vector of lowering the cost and therefore increasing the likelihood of AI-generated attacks. So maybe, Timothy, if you could touch a little bit on what does this mean for the future of phishing, for the future of sophisticated, social engineered spearfishing attacks? Like, where is this going? Is this just the beginning, and we should expect it to get more and more advanced, cheaper and cheaper? Like, what are the timelines, and where does this go? When does it end?
Yeah, I guess where we envision the future of phishing, previously in the slides, Hock touched about the pain points during a red team phishing operation, and Eugene and you touched upon like how barriers of entry towards AI as a service is growing lower and lower. So we kind of guess that the future of phishing is that you can get easy, scalable, targeted phishing that are very sophisticated at a fraction of the cost and the work or labor needed nowadays, right? So if you look into it, there are frameworks, like Humanetics that does human. So it kind of analyzes your character, your personality. So this goes into like red teaming pipelines where you can just like whatever you put out on LinkedIn, Twitter, your social media. So it analyzes your personality, and then that could be part of the phishing pipeline, right? Then you can have a very sophisticated like a pipeline where you start to analyze everything about target, and then you use like GPT-3 to generate like convincing phishing email. And the scary thing is scalable, right? So you can have at a click of a button, you can create a targeted phishing email that is very sophisticated, specifically for 100 people, right? Then I guess this would mean that for the future, it gets detection, or even try as a human, right? When I'm reading an email and trying to digest whether it's phishing or not, it gets a lot harder. And all it takes is that one email that is super convincing, and for you to fall prey to.
Yeah, it's kind of it gets scary when you take it to the when you keep going one layer deeper. I was just thinking, if the malicious actors measured click-through rates of their spearfishing campaigns, that could be now an additional signal that is then used by the next retraining of the model to tweak tactics to then, so that it is automatically, the model and the AI is automatically getting more sophisticated, given the past success rates of previous campaigns. That is obviously what attackers are doing when they are doing it, like with the people. But like, it's a scary thought if they can even automate that piece as well, where the campaign 2 learns off the success of campaign 1 and takes the best social engineering tricks, the best topics that have the highest click-through rates, and then learns from that, and therefore the next campaign is even more sophisticated. I could absolutely see that kind of being maybe the next step here. Eugene, I wonder, could you touch a little bit on like, what advice do you have for our audience? Like, is the advice, no, just keep doing what you're doing, treat it like phishing, just go after, protect, as an enterprise, you don't need to be concerned whether it's an AI or a human. The end result is a phishing email, and you just need to keep investing in technologies to detect phishing emails? Or do you actually think the approaches and the defenses that enterprises use need to adapt, because maybe AI is going to be used, if not today, certainly in the next couple of years?
So I think a lot of what organizations do these days in terms of phishing training, it's kind of based on the assumption that it might be written by another human. They're going to say, look for mistakes in the spelling, the grammar. And the problem with that, when we have AI as a service phishing, is that a lot of these markers for phishing are going to be removed. So I think there does need to be some adaptation in terms of the training. And if there are technical ways you can use it to detect AI-generated text, I think that will be helpful as well, to distinguish between legitimate AI-generated emails, such as marketing emails or just some kind of human recruiting, versus AI-generated phishing emails, which is a different matter. And so I think there's just going to be a lot of layers that organizations have to add to their workflow, not just considering the first phishing email that ends up in your inbox, or what happens after that. If the person unfortunately clicks on the link, are there mitigations built in there? And there's just going to be more layers from end to end, from phishing to exploit. I think there just needs to be more robust defenses in that area.
Great, yeah. I love that you tied it back to the kind of training and awareness side of things, where you are absolutely right. Like, one of the most basic things to train on is, hey, if it's impersonating your CEO, it's unlikely that there are going to be spelling mistakes, or it's unlikely that they are going to use these kind of phrases or poor grammar or poor punctuation. But if you just get to outsource that to an AI, like, it just goes away. It will, especially if that AI has been trained off talks or blog articles that the actual CEO has written, right? And I know that is, in the voice phishing world, that is how you train models to really simulate off, TED Talks or any other high-profile events. So yeah, pretty fascinating stuff. Eugene, maybe just sticking with you, actually. I guess we've talked about the kind of AI as a service and it lowering the cost, where's the obligation of who like regulates that or audits that? Like, is it on the company that is selling this AI as a service? Is it on government? Is it on regulators? Is it on, the enterprises need to be thinking about this themselves? Like, who is monitoring how these services are being used, and maybe what can we do better to audit those services?
So I think there's just going to be a range of these, I think, depending on your geography and how the politics are, and of course, how much leeway you want to give businesses. So, for example, in Europe, we start seeing a bit more regulation coming out in terms of the use of AI services, and then businesses might be pushing back in terms of how much they wish to be regulated. And so I think, these two, the governance side of things, both on the corporate and the regulatory side, there has to be working together to kind of build out rules of the road about the ethical use of AI services. And we're going to see a lot more of these coming out. And, I think New York City just had their own AI strategy, and different cities are coming out on a state level, on a national level. And I think there's going to be a growing consensus on what needs to be done in terms of AI ethics and the application of these services. And what we've seen, for example, with OpenAI is that, I think they're still pretty good in terms of rolling out these very high-end capabilities in a very limited and I think in a very controlled manner. I think that's something we hope to see with more of these services.
Yeah, I guess it's definitely from the services perspective, it's about them, raising the bar and making it hard to just sign up with a credit card, anonymously, and just putting these to work in maybe kind of nefarious ways, and actually making it harder, ironically, which maybe impacts their business model in the short term. But in the long term, given regulation, given the focus on AI ethics, it's going to be a very smart business move to kind of make it harder and do that diligence and do that audit of how the service is being used. Otherwise, it will kind of get away from us and they'll all have to be shut down, which I don't think anybody thinks is kind of, I guess, the future of how we want technology to progress. Yeah, super, super interesting. Maybe finally, Timothy, you could just touch a little bit on kind of where are you going next with this research? Like, is it done? You think you've achieved what you need to? Are you continuing to look and go deeper, try different methodologies? Yeah, just interested to see what you and the group are thinking about doing next.
Oh, yeah. So definitely, this is not a one-shot kind of research. Based on the success that we got from this, what our team was looking on is that, we were thinking about different ways how it could be integrated into, your pipeline. So we talk about phishing pipelines, right? So we are looking into other ways about introducing AI or, to even get it more specialized or more sophisticated. So, we're looking at integrating into different kind of pipelines. Like, I'm not sure if you know of this framework on GitHub. It's called GoFish. So, these kind of different frameworks. We are looking into how to integrate them, to create synergy. All this is particularly to ease the pain points of the red team operators that Hock had shared earlier. And on the defensive side, we also have been in talks with the ML department of our organization, talking about how we can look into what kind of data sets are we trying to look into? What are we trying to target? What is meaningful data that we can try as defensive measures? So I guess these are all the things that we are looking into on how we can further our research, and actually, to integrate into a real red teaming pipeline too.
Yeah, perfect. Well, I'm sure we all look forward to following your progress there. And maybe we can have you back at another summit where you can give us an update of kind of where the research has gone. I'm afraid that is all we've got time for. I could quite literally speak about this for hours and hours. It's pretty fascinating and a personal I love just going deep on AI, both for defense, but also thinking about it, how it can be used on offense. But thank you so much for the whole team for taking time to walk us through this research. It's been great getting to do this follow-up Q&A. And now I'm going to hand back over to Stacia, who is going to be taking on our next session. Thank you.